Welcome to Leadership Coaching. Each week, we explore fresh topics inspired by our coaching clients
and our guests to discover the essence of effective leadership.
This is the Leadership Coaching Podcast. My name is Bill Tierney. I'm a results coach and IFS practitioner, certified IFS practitioner, and this is Dr. Martin Kettlehead. Marty,
Morning.
thanks for joining me. Another episode. We just briefly discussed that we would like to talk about creativity today.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike many of the episodes that we recorded, we've already talked for 10 or 15 minutes often about the topic before we hit record. Today, we haven't really talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Other than me mentioning that where my mind is as I come into this recording today is a little different than normal. Today is the day before Christmas, 2024. And this is my first conversation of the day. Normally, when I'm coming into a recording of an episode, I've already had a coaching group and at least one, sometimes two clients prior to coming in. And so I'm often inspired by those coaching sessions. And that has me kind of already thinking about these different concepts and ideas.
Right.
And I just mentioned that, where my mind has been is in writing my book and working on and doing the creative work. And that's when you said, well, let's talk about that today.
Let's talk about creativity. Yeah. One of the self's core qualities. And so one of the ways we can talk about it is, it's desirable. We all like to be able to create. And how do we get in that place? And a number of people that I talk to, especially here at the holiday season, it's like, oh yeah, I don't have time to bake, or I don't have time to wrap presents, or to work on a book like you are taking time to do, because there's just too much going on. So that's starting to hint at the difference between the creative state and the busy mind state. But another thing I think would be interesting to touch on is the difference between being creative and creating. So I've mentioned this with a couple of clients recently that, there's, by the former, I mean doing something that falls into the category of creative. It could be macrame, or it could be playing the guitar, or it could be painting or playing an instrument. Those are all things we consider creative activities, but there's a soft, not a strict difference between that and bringing something into existence that wasn't in existence before.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So making something out of nothing, right? Which is what you've done with your practice. It's what you've done with your life. It's what we do in a new relationship, right? There's a lot of just a hint at how creative we are, in this sense of like bringing something into existence, not just doing, a craft or something like that, which is they're not mutually exclusive. They do overlap. But when I talk to business leaders, for example, right, they want to be creative in this second sense of, I want to bring existence. I want to, create wealth that wasn't there before, those kinds of things, which is different from, on the weekend, I like to, weave baskets or, do something creative.
Yeah, like Nora, who does the she made the plates for her son, that whole dinner set that she made, and
Right.
she just enjoys that process. Even last night, I picked up the guitar for the first time in probably a couple of months at least, and pulled it out, and now it's out in the living room. Usually, it hangs on the wall in my bedroom, and
Mhm.
it might as well not even be there. I'm used to seeing it hanging on the wall, and it doesn't even occur to me as something to do to pull off the wall. But I did. We're going to a Christmas party tomorrow, dinner tomorrow, and I'm going to bring my guitar. I used to do that all the time. If I was going to be in a social situation, unless it was a funeral, I was bringing my guitar.
Mhm.
And actually, I brought my guitar to a funeral once too, because I was asked to play. But I pulled it out last night, and the moment I got it tuned up, the creative juices started flowing.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's it's very enjoyable for me. It's very rewarding and very enjoyable. I've heard
Mhm.
people say, "Have you ever talked to anybody that said I'm not creative?"
Yes, I have. Mhm. And I begged to differ.
Yeah, well, same here. Same here. Although I guess I used to think that there are people that are creative and people that aren't, until I realized we are all creative. There
Mhm.
are those of us who, for whatever reason, don't see ourselves as creative, and then there are those that do identify as creative. I certainly
Yeah.
see myself as creative now. I don't know that I did when I was in my younger years.
There are certain social structures that, um, we inherit or not, that we, um, carry on accept and carry on or not, like that say, like, you have to be you have to come out of a school, you have to have studied with somebody, or you have to have made a certain amount of money, or had a show at a certain museum or something, or gallery, in order to be creative, and
Mhm,
so if you accept those norms, then, well, most of us are not creative.
mhm, mhm.
But right? But that's just not really what creative means, right?
Right. And there's so many different directions we can go with this conversation. Feels like we're kind of trying to find our way. You introduced that there's a distinction between creating and being creative. I'd like to hear more about that. Can you share some more of your thoughts about that?
Yes, especially when I'm talking in the business world, this might not be as important a distinction elsewhere, but I don't know. People want the business leader wants to build a business, like to create something that isn't there already. A business machine, a team, a track record, all of that shows that we have created something that wasn't there before. And that's different from, they're not interested, these people that I'm coaching in business, they're not interested in just finding something to keep them busy when they're not working. That, they'd rather be working, you know.
Mhm.
And it is important that they do have that kind of creative downtime activity, even if it's sailing, like that. They're learning how and designing a way to sail a boat is just as creative as, knitting socks, I would say, you know. So they need both, but they're very interested in this notion, especially when you get into like project design, the difference between a project that's designed to bring something into existence, right? Versus it's something that just rehearses motions we already go through.
Following models that are already established, whether they are our own or someone else's,
Hmm.
repetitiously going through the same motions that we have every day for the last several years. That would be an absence of creativity. And as I think about that, I've certainly had a lot of experiences with that, and it is life sucking to experience that without creative expression. I'm exhausted just
Yeah.
doing the same things over and over and over and over again, because I have to, because I feel like I must, or because I just haven't tapped into that creative flow.
The classic commentary on that repetitious behavior that has no creativity in it is that famous Lucille Ball skit, or it's an episode from uh
I Love Lucy.
I Love Lucy, right? Where she's on the conveyor belt just doing the same thing. But of course, she's creative. She creates something new out of that. But getting back to, what it is said, so I'm not bringing this up as a matter of religious dogma, but it is said that we are made in the image of God, and God, the creator,
Mhm.
that would mean that we have that power to create something out of nothing, right? Like, let's say a family. Let's take the example of a family. Like, two people come together and they create a family and children and a heritage and a legacy and a place to live and a set of values and right all and participation in their community. Now that's something that wasn't there before those two people created a family,
That's
right?
right.
But we don't normally think like, yeah, that's like what God does, bring something into existence that wasn't there before. Whereas, you know, just uh doing some like collaging, which is a great thing to do. I don't have anything against it. It can
Yeah.
be amazingly
I don't think anybody has anything against collaging.
right. So, but that's not as well. There, that I would say is probably on that overlap, because you are making something there,
Yeah,
right,
different strokes.
right,
They're different
right.
strokes. I think of my son Billy, who is so extremely creative, and there can be some friction between how much of my energy and effort and time do I want to put into creativity, and how much do I want to put into functionality. So
Uh-huh.
to be
Right.
successful in the
So
world,
utility would be another word in case people are, listening. A utility, something, that you do to accomplish a task as opposed to for its own sake.
right? So the word I was using was functionality. You're using the word utility. Yeah, yeah. And so Billy, my son, was invited to come volunteer to run the concessions for an improv troupe
Hmm.
when he was 17 years old. He's now 44. And I had to stop and do the math. Is that yes, 44? And now he was invited to actually perform in the improv troupe after he'd been volunteering for a few months, and had a mentor, Mark Robbins, funny guy here in Spokane, Washington. Uh, and he fell in love with improv. And so here he is all these years later. What's the math on that? 27 years later. And he's devoted his life, his profession, and his career to around the creative uh, process, I guess, of not just improv. He's the marketing. He does all the marketing for the Whidbey Island Center for the Arts. He teaches improv classes. But the challenge here is, how do you support a family and make a living while expressing yourself creativity, and how do you find that balance? And of course, those of us that are invested in creativity face that same challenge. How do we, and we see folks that do very well for themselves with just expressing themselves creatively, and utilitarian in the world, functioning very well, very, very well. But most of us that are really wanting to spend more time creating are faced with that challenge. How do I create and
Hmm.
also get some sort of a return on that investment? Sometimes there's not a, a monetary return on that investment.
Right, given our society's values and the hierarchy of those values. But I think part of the reason for bringing in this distinction between just being creative versus creating something is to show that we are all creative, and the closer you can get to that middle line, where you're bringing something into existence, and it's some moving you out of just a life of repetition and being in a rut, right? The more you can see your life as on that tightrope, then I think the more satisfying it's gonna be,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that, like, there are people who do jobs that need to be done that are more repetitious, you know? I suppose repairing a car is an example. Um, you know, that you there's a certain way it has to be. You do this, you get this same working car going every time another one comes in. It's like, okay, just get it to do what it needs to do. There's no like invention of new car there or a new way that the transmission could work. No, it's got to work this way. But what I would say is that that person has a meditative capacity, or a capacity to pay attention to the same thing over and over, which is, a very valuable quality that somebody who's, just brainstorming all day, doing nothing but quote unquote creative work, that might not have that ability to focus and stay with a task and do it again and do it better and better each time, right? So this isn't like it's bad to be not creative conversation, right? And you should be creative. That's not you. All human beings are made in the image of God, and they are creating at some level. And there's a lot of credit to be given for those people who have more repetitious jobs, right? Because they it takes a different kind of attention span and focus and care to do those jobs than ones where, you just bop from one meeting to another saying creative things. Like, that's different. That's a very different mind.
I'm thinking of Tony, my wife. My wife's son, Tony, is a mechanic, and uh, one of the most creative people I know. And I don't know if he would think of himself as creative, but
Mhm.
I've helped him work on his mom's car over at our house, and I've been over at his house to see the things that he's doing. He is in a constant process of creation. He's bought
Mhm.
himself a house here about 10 years ago and is constantly working on it and creating these images and these ideas and these visions of what he wants to have happen in his house. He's recreating his whole garage shop area, built himself a reservoir tank to hold fuel and in case that he needs fuel and doesn't want to have to go travel to get it. When he's working on a car, he's constantly coming up with these creative ideas on how he has to in order to diagnose what happened. Why is the car not running now? So in his mind, he's running through his in his mind. This is the way it's supposed to work, and it's not working that way. What might have happened? He's looking at evidence, like he's a private eye. Practically, he's an automotive private eye. He's looking at the evidence and he's trying to figure out what has happened to this car that it isn't running well. I really want to agree with you that at some level we are all creating, and if we could really get into the mind of the person that might even think of themselves as not creative, we would see how creative they actually are. How
Yeah, but a doctor is another example like this. Like, you might think, well, there's, you know, these bodies, they get these problems and you fix them. But it's actually a very creative field, because the answer, it's not like you just deduce, oh, therefore,
Mhm.
because these systems, therefore they're constantly having to create. Well, let's try a little bit of this and see if that, how, oh no, that's not working, we have to speak to this issue. Like, they're creating um solutions to innumerable issues that come up. um I One thing I want to get back to before the end of the conversation was, like, how do we get in this state? We're making fine distinctions now inside of creativity, like what is actually bringing something new in existence, and what is just finding the attention span for something that's repetitious,
Yeah,
and all of the phases in between, like your nephew or son-in-law.
yeah. It's my wife's son. Who's the
Your
mechanic?
wife.
My son, who's the improviser.
But I wanna do get back to the, to the how, what, because we all want to be creative. But just on that note that we were just on, I was working for a company once, as a coach. We did programs, for groups, and, we spent a whole day, I remember once, working on the structure of the program, what needs to come at what point, and what points to dilate on, what's the structure of the day in this seminar.
Mhm.
And then at the end of it, I used PowerPoint to create a little diagram that illustrated the main points, of the day in a um in a PowerPoint um slide. And it meant taking shapes that they offer and putting, arrows between them and labeling them, and colors. And my boss came back to me and she was like, "Wow, you're very creative."
Mhm.
And it struck me like I didn't think of that as a creative thing. I feel like I'm just illustrating the point, and like drawing a graph of it on the chalkboard. Like, this didn't feel creative to me, but for her, that was very creative, right? And then from then on, she kept giving me creative work to do,
Right.
right?
Did you
And
enjoy it?
I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so I
It's
think that's the key. That's one of the keys to the question that you're asking is how do you get into that creative state?
Mhm,
If you're
mhm.
enjoying it, it's easy to do. But if you're not
Yeah,
enjoying it, it's almost impossible.
right.
If she
Yeah.
if she had handed you work, even though she thought saw it as creative that you weren't interested in, that
Mhm,
you didn't enjoy doing it, your creativity, I'm asserting your creativity would have been shut down. You would have
mhm.
done enough to get by, and
Right, right.
yeah.
But that expanded her saying that expanded my notion of creativity, right? Because I didn't realize that's not something that she or anybody else on that team was interested in doing, because it was creative work. And for me, it was a kind of a translate. It was like putting it into another language for me,
Yes,
making a visual of it.
yes.
That didn't feel creative, it just felt like a translation job. Like a translator at the UN doesn't isn't creating a new thing for the guy from Russia to hear. He's just translating the English into Russian, right? And that's what it
Mhm,
felt like to me. But
mhm,
even there, you see, that's a creative act. Stephen Mitchell, the wife of Byron Katie, is a
mhm,
translator.
mhm,
He's written extensively on what a creative act
mhm,
translate is. He
mhm.
translates Sanskrit and French and German into English, and he's great at it. He's world famous for it. And he stresses, like, this is a creative act too. I'm not just mechanically translating.
Yeah, it's not something a bot could do. Yeah. Let's go back to what you're saying about what does it take to get into that creative state?
Mhm.
And I want to suggest that um, some evidence for that might be to look at what would stop you from just being creative.
Would you like to elevate your leadership? Be sure to pick up my new book, Leadership as Relation, to explore leading by empowering others. Now back to the episode. Yeah. Yeah.
As you mentioned, creativity is one of the 8 C's that the internal family systems model uses to when talking about the qualities of the self with a capital S. I also refer to those qualities as resources. Creativity is a resource that we can tap into, and it's also a quality that shows up when we are in that self state, or it's one of them that can show up in that state. What blocks it is fear, and what seems to generate it or have it flow easily is love, which is a which is akin to enjoyment.
Yeah. Well, or enjoyment is a species of it. It's the general, it's the genus, and yeah, I think that would be the relationship. It's a type of enjoyment. Yeah.
Well, I'm just basing my comments and on my experience of it. When I am in joy, I'm kind
Hmm.
of in love with what I'm
Right.
doing, with who I'm with the environment I find myself
Exactly.
in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and so back up from there, then how do you get into love? Out of fear and into love.
Right. Well, you don't get there by pushing the fear away because now that's going to require even more effort. We're fear is already requiring a lot of energy.
Hmm.
Fear is all about survival. And if I try to push fear away, now the energy I'm already putting into being afraid and being concerned about whatever it is that's generating that fear,
Hmm.
now I've doubled up on that energy because now I have to try to control it, and I got nothing left. I've used up so much of my capacity that I got no access to. I've got no access to these 8 C's,
Hmm.
including creativity.
Right.
But what there is to do then is to get curious, which is another one of the C's. We can pull one of the qualities of C's, and even if we just have to put effort into doing what someone that is curious would do, pretty soon it kind of creates its own momentum.
Hmm.
What would it take for me to be curious about this fear? And if I were curious, what would I be asking? What would the question be? Often I'll
Hmm.
do that with my clients when they say, when I ask them, this is a crucial question, by the way, in the IFS model. I'll ask the client, how do you feel toward the part of you that influences you to feel, for example, fear?
Hmm.
And if I hear them say curious, well, I'm curious about it. I believe them, but I also want to test them. So I'll say, oh, great. From curiosity, what would you ask?
Hmm.
What's the question? And often that'll reveal that, oh, I want to be curious, but I'm really not. But more often than not, the curiosity that they're stating that they have does come with the question. They just have to sit with it for a minute. I'm curious what's causing this fear. What the I'm curious what the part of me that has the fear is afraid of, is concerned about. Well, let's
Hmm.
ask. And in the IFS model, we get to go right to the part and ask, hey, part that's fearful, what are you scared about? What is your concern?
Uh-huh.
And if we can just get quiet, and then now this goes back into a practice that you have, that even if it only lasts for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, to just get quiet inside, ask the question, and then get quiet inside and wait for an answer, and ask all of your other parts that want to provide the answers. We want to hear directly from the part that's afraid. All
Hmm.
the other parts that think they have theories about why this part is afraid, we need them to listen as well. So I'll suggest to the client, see if all your other parts can get curious with you about this fearful part. Now that opens up the possibility of some 10, 15 seconds, maybe not even that long, of just going inside, being quiet. What are you afraid of? And waiting for an answer. And then boom, it'll just show up.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid that I'm going to do it wrong. I'm afraid, whatever that is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my hunch is, and I want to check this out with you, that this fear that prevents us from being our naturally creative selves, it I'm suspecting that it could take a lot of different forms. Like it might not look like fear right away, but I think you're right that fear is what's underneath.
Hmm.
So, but I just want to open our listeners up to think, if you're not being creative and you want to be creative, this fear might look like busyness. It might be, that you don't realize that by constantly being busy, you're acting out a kind of fear, but
Hmm.
that that's what's underneath,
Hmm.
right? Or um, the fear might look like boredom. There's a criticism, a judgment about what you're doing, that it's boring. that hides a fear. Oh, which, it could be of any sort, but but
That's
but
right.
but you're putting, the boredom, you're making the thing wrong, the activity wrong, calling it boredom as a way to not see the fear itself. So, and I'm sure we could come up with a million examples, but any state other than that of the self, you want to question, like, is there an underlying fear that, attending to could release you back into your creative self?
And just getting curious about whatever's showing up, whether it's apparently fear or not.
Right, right.
Anger, and you've given some great examples there. Boredom, anger,
Hmm.
overworking, staying busy. Um, if it's not flowing,
Hmm.
it's probably because it's not creative. If it's not flowing, it's probably because it's misaligned with purpose. And that purpose word can be really tricky. All of this can be really tricky if depending on if the perception of the language that we're using is being that perception is being provided by a part that's still tethered to the past
Hmm.
or by self or by a part that's led by self and present
Hmm.
related to the present moment. So if we're talking about creativity and a part of me gets activated and thinks about that time that I took my drawing to mom and I said, look, mom, and she was busy and she was irritated and impatient with me. Now it feels kind of dangerous to be creative. If that's the
Yeah.
part that's still tethered to the past, doesn't want to
Hmm.
be creative because I felt rejected when I was 6 years old and mom didn't like my drawing or didn't pay attention to it.
Hmm.
That's a kind of an extreme example, I suppose, of how a part of me is sitting in my seat of consciousness and perceiving the present moment, but from a past based experience.
Hmm.
That's going to block creativity right there.
Well, even in my example of my boss complimenting me on that PowerPoint slide that I made, that by the way, we printed out copies of it and laminated it and gave it to all the participants. Um, if I were to just come back and say, "Oh, I have another PowerPoint," I have, like, the
Yeah.
creativity goes out of it. I'm acting out of the fear of not getting that same approval again.
Right. Or the seeking of that approval. Right. The fear. You're exactly right. I'm afraid I'm going to go back to that place where I was in relationship to my boss before I got their approval.
And see, that's not creative. That
No.
you get it? That's so not creative.
Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of creative from the perspective of it. If you imagine a young child that's figuring out ways to survive in a situation that is challenging to survive in.
That's
How,
true. That's
how can I
true.
get
Yeah.
my needs met? My young parts that I've discovered on my IFS journey are extremely creative,
Mhm,
given their age and the resources they had at that age. A
mhm.
5-year-old who might tell a fib and lie just to get mom and dad's approval or to
Right.
avoid getting their disapproval. Just to that's creative, but it's creative in a way that's survival based. And there's a different feeling, a different taste to that altogether.
So now we have three different, nothing is not creative. We've got three different distinctions now. There's bringing something new into existence, there's doing artsy things, and then there's creative survival,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Nothing, so far, nothing is not creative.
And I don't remember where I first was read this idea or was taught this idea, but the idea that human beings are not certainly not the biggest, the most ferocious, or the strongest in the animal kingdom, and yet
Mhm.
we have survived all these millions and millions of years because we can create, because we can collaborate, because we are social, because we can brainstorm together, we can figure things out.
Yeah.
And I know many animals do that as well, but we have apparently the ability to create like no other animal that can, and to be creative, figure out how to start a fire, how to how to pound a rock until it's round and rolls, um, make
Well,
music.
I was watching a Netflix thing on the mind uh, of dogs, narrated by Rob Lowe, and they start by saying that all of the dogs that we have in our homes now, they all, their ancestry goes back to wolves,
Mhm.
right? And how did wolves and people come together in domesticity? Well, you know, human beings left all these scraps of food around, and wolves would come, and there became a kind of symbiotic relationship. They could sit around our fires after we went back into our teepees to bed and be warm and eat our scraps, and so they became more and closer to that. Was a creative thing that the species did. I mean, it's hard to assign creativity to an individual dog, but the species itself created this relationship with man.
It's interesting. I'll bet
It's-
I'll have to check that out.
yeah,
Where did
it's
you where did you watch that? Was that on Netflix?
Netflix.
Oh, okay. What's it? Do you remember what it's called?
The Mind of Dog,
The
or
Mind of God.
the mind of your dog, or of dogs, something like that.
Well, that's interesting. I'll have to check it out. So this idea, this creativity, if we're not tapped into it, then something's off. It seems like it is just a natural, innate quality
Mhm.
that we all have, and if we're not accessing it, there's a pretty good indication right there that we're off. Something's off inside, and then it's time to slow down and get curious about what it is. What is it that's off?
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Exactly.
Whatever that is, it's not to be suppressed or managed or controlled. Simply getting curious about it seems to unfold it in such a way that it now is no longer misaligned, or at least it creates the possibility of that.
Right. It's kind of like it's what's not forced. It's like the universe just blooming, and it could be through a human being making something, but a flower blooming is creative from this perspective too. It's just the natural flowering when we're not suppressing it with self-consciousness or fear or anger or some other psychological state. That it's the natural unfolding of human being.
Or of the flower. Now, is that flower
Well,
that's unfolded, that's blooming, is it working or playing or creating or doing a
right,
repetitious?
it's trying to get recognition. Or in a way, by blooming, it attracts, right, bugs that seed its pollen. I mean, in a way, it is attracting.
I want to read you. I don't know if I've ever read this to you. I know that I haven't read it on the podcast before, but this is a quote by a guy by the name of Lawrence Pearsall Jacks.
Uh-huh.
A master in the art of living draws no sharp distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his education and his recreation. He hardly knows which is which. He
Hmm.
simply pursues his vision of excellence through whatever he's doing and leaves others to determine whether he is working or playing. To himself, he always appears to be doing both. I
Love.
believe that. Yeah, me too. I got it hanging right up there. I look at it at least once a week or so, and just feel so grateful that's the life that I get to live. That what others might call work to me, is that what I'm doing? Feels kind of playful to me.
Right. Playful. I'm glad you used that word. I've been thinking all along. Playful is another characteristic, right? Because when we're in a psychological state, where the play is tethered, to say the least. It might be totally tied down, like in Charles Dickens, Robinson Crusoe. Right? It might be totally tied down, but it's at least tethered by an attachment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for creativity, in creativity, when there's play of some kind, play of concepts,
Mm-hmm.
you know, play of the body, play of possibilities, like that's another sign. Okay, we're moving. back into this natural state.
Mhm,
There's play.
mhm, mhm. There's also an aspect of learning around creativity.
Mhm.
I an example of how my parts blocked my ability to just be creative and playful was when, before my wife and I got married, we wanted to be able to dance, a ballroom dance at our wedding.
Uh-huh.
And I'd never been trained to do that before. So we signed up for dance lessons. And one of my friends, who I'd known for 10 years at that point, was a ballroom dancer and loved doing it, swing
Mhm.
dancing and all the different ones. And in fact, he met his wife by going to these ballroom dance practices. I don't know what they call them. And so he and his girlfriend at the time, they ended up getting married about a year after we did, um, offered to teach us how to ballroom dance. And no
Mhm.
matter what I did, I could not get myself to relax and enjoy it. It always felt like work. I always felt self conscious. I always had this voice in my head saying, "You look stupid. You're doing it wrong."
Mm.
And my body responded in kind with stiffness. And um, uh, Jason was his name. Jason and Angie was the couple's name. And they would just say, "Bill, you're taking this way too seriously." Yes, there are definitely ways to dance, to properly dance this particular dance. However, if you're trying to control yourself to do it, there's a paradox here that you have to just let go and let yourself make some mistakes. And I had parts at that time, this is long before I learned about IFS, that would not allow me to make a mistake. Even though I was with people that loved me, my wife to be and these two friends, my parts didn't care about that. They were so concerned about messing up, making a mistake, and looking foolish that I could not relax.
Well, the whole context was, "Let's look good at the wedding."
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Mhm. But, yeah, that's a perfect example. Like, once you were attached to looking good doing it, the
Hmm.
play was gone,
Hmm. Hmm.
the
Yes.
flexibility. Yeah.
Matthew and I would practice at home, and I'd make myself practice. I didn't want to do it. It was so painful. We did dance at our wedding, and then I quit trying to dance. I just quit trying to learn. It'd be kind of interesting now that I've done the work that I've done in IFS if I might be able to do it again.
I bet you'd be a very different experience at the very least, you know?
Probably
I mean,
so.
that's why they say in those bumper stickers and posters, "Dance like nobody's looking," right? To
Hmm.
take that piece out of it.
Hmm.
I know I'm a very self-conscious dancer
But
myself.
it doesn't say ballroom dance like nobody's looking though.
Yeah. No, right.
Let's see if we can summarize and kind of begin to wrap up this conversation. We we didn't have any preparation for it other than the idea. We like the idea of creativity. We've touched on a lot of different points. How would you summarize what we've discussed here today?
Well, what I've learned, and I do mean I learned it, is that e every phenomenon, every, thing we experience has creativity in it. It's just, are we open, to seeing it that way? Whether it's outside of us or coming from us, it's 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 not the same as a minute ago. But to see the creativity in it takes um attending to your parts so that you can be back in the flow, the clarity of the universe constantly blooming in all these ways.
Yeah, and I think that that's what's important about the idea of creativity and the experience of it is that it puts us in the flow. And
Hmm.
uh, just simply the experience of being in a flow state is practically addictive to me. It's just something that I really enjoy and would miss if I couldn't find my way back there again.
And I think that's what, your mechanic friend is doing. Like, this is my job. And so he's finding creativity in the moment, right? Even though he might be repairing a car in the same way that he's repaired so many cars before, he brings creativity and flow to his job.
And the learning piece of it for him has been he's had to learn how to weld. He's had to learn how to innovate, to fabricate parts when they're not available. He's gotten really good at being able to do these things. And as a result, he's moved from working in a garage where he's hired to do tune-ups and oil changes and motor rebuilds to working in a fab shop where people bring their four-wheel drives in, and he helps create these new beasts out of stock cars and trucks, uh, beefing up the suspension and fabricating different parts for the cars so that they are the most unique things on the road. He's really in the flow state because he gets to use all the skills that he's developed and learned over the years, which probably like me, I can't speak for him, but I'm imagining if someone said, here's all the equipment that you need to weld, let me show you how to weld. I'd be really interested in doing it, but I also might be pretty nervous about doing it wrong. And that would block my ability to learn it and block my ability to create because I'd be too busy being concerned about getting it wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Like in a dance class.
Yes, exactly. So creativity seems to be tied in with purpose. I personally believe that we all have a distinct purpose and that purpose can change throughout our lives, but that at any given point, our internal guidance system will tell us if we are aligned with that purpose, and when it's time to change that purpose, if we can be flexible enough to move in that direction of that internal push and stay creative and open, that it seems to be that is for me the elixir of life. It is just joyful. That's what puts me in the flow. And when I think that what I was doing 5 years ago that I enjoyed so much, I should still be able to enjoy. When I don't anymore, that's something to notice and see if I can let go of, to move on to what is it that life's calling me to do now. That I believe is a huge part of being able to be and get into that creative state.
Let's come back to that topic of purpose and its relationship to creativity in another episode. There's a lot to say there.
Purpose and its relationship to creativity. I'm going to make a note of that so that we don't forget, which we kind of do sometimes. We'll say something like that in an episode and then we never come back to it. Purpose in relationship to creativity. Let's come back to it in another episode.
You do a pretty good job of keeping track of our ideas for episodes, I must say, and I thank you for that too.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, part of the reason I do is because I write it down.
Exactly right. Yes.
Creative way to remember, I guess. Huh? Okay, Ari, always enjoy our conversations.
Bye for now, but Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you, Marty, and to anybody else that's listening, whatever year it might be.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Coaching, where we help you learn to lead with confidence and compassion.
If you enjoyed listening, please share it. Don't miss a single episode. To subscribe and to get show notes, visit leadershipcoachingpodcast.com.